Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Ever Forward Mindset Podcast. We're here live at FreedomFest 2026 here in Las Vegas, Nevada. This is the first for us, so we're really excited. My name is Michael Rebelo. I'm the host and founder of the Ever Forward Mindset Podcast, and I'm a 20-year-old entrepreneur who chose entrepreneurship over the traditional college path, inspired and driven by my goal to inspire and help other middle Americans just like my mother to learn about passive income, to get financial freedom, and to also think bigger and think independently. And today I have a gentleman who knows just how to do that, Topher Field. How are you, my friend?
Well, Michael, I'm doing very well. It's also my first Freedom Fest, and I'm loving it so far.
It's a first for the both of us.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. You flew all the way from Australia, and you've been here in the United States for a long time. You and I had a chance to talk a little bit, but I would love to kind of dive into why are you here and who you are today. Like, what is your mission?
Sure. So this event, Freedom Fest, is actually the catalyst. It's why I'm here. I had the opportunity to speak at the main stage. So I'm best known for being a leading figure during the lockdowns, the COVID lockdowns in Melbourne, Australia. We became the most locked down city in the world. I directed the definitive documentary about those 18 months as we descended. I call it the descent into madness. The documentary is called Battleground Melbourne because that's what it became. We had armoured cars on the streets. We had police shooting people with rubber bullets. We had military checkpoints set up where you couldn't leave your home or you'd get arrested. People don't understand just how crazy it got. So I directed a documentary for the purpose of telling the world, guys, this happened in a free country. This happened in Australia. And 3 years ago, that documentary, Battleground Melbourne, actually won the Best Libertarian Ideals Award here at Anthem. And I was invited to come over and to actually to speak and to accept that award, and I couldn't back then. Now, add to that, Spike Cohen, who's someone who I know a lot of your listeners and viewers will know of, he came to Australia around about the same time, and I gave a keynote address at an Australian conference, and Spike came up to me afterwards and he said, Topher, that's the message that every American needs to hear. Put two and two together, 3 years later, I'm finally here with the help of Spike and at Freedom Fest to give kind of the grandchild of that message that he heard 3 years ago. And also, Joanne Skousen, the patron of the Anthem Film Festival, has very graciously agreed to post hoc award me with that award in person. So I get that experience 3 years later, which is lovely. But that's really the reason I'm here. But I've earned a bit of a reputation over the years. I've been a political commentator for 17 years, and I'm known as Australia's leading libertarian voice. I'm the most recognised, most awarded Australian libertarian ever. And so when I put the word out that I was coming to the United States, other conferences began to reach out to me and say, hey, will you speak here, will you speak there? So it's turned into a 9-week, 9-conference tour that started at the start of June and doesn't finish until the second week of August this year. So it's a pretty busy time, but I'm loving it. I love the US. This is my 8th time here. I absolutely adore this place. And one of the things that makes me madder than anything is when Americans take what you have for granted, because that's how you lose it. And if you guys lose what you have, you are a unique country founded on a unique set of principles. There is nowhere else like America. And some Americans get mad at me when I say that. They're like, why is it on us? Why is all the pressure on us? I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't choose that for you, but it is. Yep. And what happens in America affects the rest of the world. What Anthony Fauci did with the gain-of-function research affected the entire world. What Donald Trump has done pushing back against censorship, love him or hate him, I think is a mixed, I've got mixed reviews on Trump, let's be clear.
Absolutely.
But what he's done regarding censorship in the EU and having Marco Rubio pushing back on that, what he's done kind of in conjunction but separately with Elon Musk buying Twitter, renaming it to X, and really taking a stand against Australia's e-safety commissioner, which is our censorship board, so to speak. That has changed the world. America changes the world whether you like it or not. And so I'm here to try and inspire you based on my own actions back in Australia, saying, hey, the spirit of 1776 was a spirit of disobeying government when it goes too far. Right? So here's the principle. The limits of government power are defined by one thing throughout history. There's only one thing that actually keeps government limited, and that is the people reaching the limit of their obedience.
That's very true.
So if
we're seeing that today.
Well, if you believe in limited government, every American says, "Oh, we believe in limited government." You're told that from school.
Right.
You hear it everywhere. If you believe in limited government, then you must believe that there is a point where you will say no. And if you don't, then you don't actually believe in limited government.
And we forget that we have that choice.
Yeah.
I mean, in the schools as well, like when I was being taught in school, it's like, oh yeah, this is limited government, this is, how politics work and everything, but I'm like, it can't just be that. There has to be a little bit more to that.
Okay, so let's dive into that for a second, because what you were taught was about the mechanics of how the US government works, how the framers and founders, and then of course it's evolved a little bit since then, but how they tried to protect freedom. They had a Bill of Rights and your first 10 amendments to the Constitution.
Right.
Then, of course, there's more after that. They had separations of powers. They had various democratic methods. Now, they've evolved over time. The original way that a president was elected is different now to what it is now. But fundamentally, the message that you receive as a child in school is we're a free country because we have all of these institutions and protections in place to preserve your freedom. Well, that, unfortunately, is a lie, because that is dead letter. No number of bills of rights is worth anything if you're not willing to actually stand up for them.
That's true.
No amount of separation of powers is worth anything if you're not willing to press back when the government exceeds its powers, when those separations begin to break down. They're good things, I'm not knocking them, but they are not worth anything unless the people themselves are willing to animate them, to bring them to life. That's what I call the spirit of 1776.
Right.
And if I can be so bold as an Australian, as an outsider, to use the phrase, the problem with America today, right? And so many people come into America and they say, well, the problem with America is you're not like Europe. The problem with America is you're not like Australia or Canada or whatever. Ignore them all. They're all idiots. The problem with America is that you are not sufficiently like 1776. You have the answers within yourselves. You don't need to look to foreign countries. You don't need to look to Australia for your answers. Your answers are right there in your heritage. The problem with America today is that you have too much 1984 and not enough 1776.
Interesting.
And yes, I have that on a T-shirt and a cap, and I'll be wearing that tomorrow when I give my keynote address.
I'm going to have to get a picture of that. But I would love to dive in a little bit, because you said that it resides in the people, and I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Because they're just going down this path of yes. Like, why are you saying yes? Think for a minute. Is this what you want? Is this what your children want? I think of this like, the generation after me is going to be voting. And who are they voting for, and who's getting the office? And I'm like scratching my head going, I don't like where this is going, because we're being brainwashed. Like, for example, Casey Fleming was on stage yesterday, talked about TikTok, how it's brainwashing kids to say, like, well, you don't even know who you're voting for anymore. You don't even know how to even think for yourself anymore.
You don't even know how to discern truth from fiction anymore, and that's a problem that's going to get even worse as AI develops further.
Oh, it's just getting worse.
I'm in this space. I've been in this space for 17 years, and I can usually, most of the time, I can pick an AI video. Give it another 2 years of refinement, and it will be basically impossible to pick an AI video. So discerning truth from fiction is going to be a really radically difficult thing. But can I also say, I'm really encouraged, because I believe that we are in the middle of the next great cultural revolution. This is the answer to the 1960s sexual revolution. So the 1960s sexual revolution, there's a couple of concepts here. Every culture breeds its own counterculture. Now, this has always been true.
That's
so
true.
we saw the post-war, the greatest generation post-war boom, the prosperity that came with that bred, and we've stereotyped it. It wasn't like this, but the stereotypical white picket fence, nuclear family, one income type situation. And that lasted through the 50s, amazing technological innovation, amazing advancements. Then come the 60s, we had the sexual revolution. That was the counter to the post-war joy and stability that had come. Now we had the hedonism and the selfishness kicking in. Now, that has been the prevailing culture. The sexual revolution set the prevailing culture for the last 60 years. But right now, it's already happening. This is not a prediction for the future. We can already see it. The next great cultural revolution is happening. So there's two things you need to look out for. Well, number one is that every culture breeds its own counterculture. The second thing to watch for is that the revolution always eats its own children. Now, the sexual revolution began to eat its own children about 8 years ago. And we saw this with the people who didn't stay on the trans agenda as that rolled through the cultural revolution. So the sexual revolution kicked off with free love, we don't have to be married, etc., and ended up with we can give transgender surgeries to kids. And there's a lot of people who were on board early and got off the train. And when you see the revolution eating them, I'm going to give you some names. People like Germaine Greer, people like Martina Navratilova, the first openly gay professional women's tennis player. She was openly lesbian, one of the greatest female tennis players of her era. We see J.K. Rowling, celebrated feminist icon, successful author. She didn't get on the trans train, and now she's persona non grata. They're trying to cancel Harry Potter, one of the most popular franchises in the world. Okay, so the revolution is eating its own children. These women were a part of the revolution. They are feminist icons, but they didn't stay all the way through. And now they're being eaten by their own revolution. When you see those two things happening, there's a dominant culture that has been dominant for a while, and the revolution that created that culture begins to eat its own children. That's when you know you're on the cusp of an incredible cultural revolution, and that is what we're witnessing. Young people today are more likely to go and get a trade and start working young rather than going to university. That's a very good thing. They're actually, in surveys, Generation Alpha is too young to be having kids yet, but in surveys, they are expressing intent to get married younger, to have more kids, to settle down. We're watching the younger half of Generation Z. They're they're going out of their way to find churches. And I say this as a Pentecostal, they're not looking for the Pentecostal happy-clappy churches. They're looking for the traditional ones that have liturgies and history and substance.
Yeah.
They're looking at their parents and even their grandparents, because we're talking about young people here, who are the children of the sexual revolution, and they're saying, I don't want what you've got. Whatever it is that made you, I don't want that. You've got divorce and blended families and stepdads and lawyers involved in every aspect of your life. I don't want that. And they're looking for something older. They're looking for something that is, they don't know this.
Something concrete.
Yeah, but they don't realize that this is what they're doing, but they're looking for something that predated the sexual revolution. And they're finding it in more traditional denominations of church, etc. Now, tragedies like the assassination of Charlie Kirk have accelerated that. That really put that on steroids for a lot of younger men. But we are in the middle of an incredible cultural revolution. What concerns me is that cultural revolution is not happening equally amongst young men and young women. We're seeing a massive divergence between young men and young women right now.
I'm seeing the same thing.
I'm watching that with interest because this cultural revolution will run into trouble in the next 3 to 5 years unless it begins to happen amongst young women as well. If young men who are enjoying this find themselves isolated and unable to find a wife who isn't some kind of a left-wing nut job, then that is going to cause a percentage of them to prioritize a woman, a wife, that sort of thing, because that's part of their values. That's what they want. But I can't find one that agrees with me, so I'll just take whoever I can get. Yeah. So we need this cultural revolution to shift from being just among young men to being also among young women. And I don't know how to do that. I'm not the right person to do that. I don't know what the answer there is. But that's the next critical thing that we all need to be observing is, does that happen? Because if it does, then this will be a lasting cultural revolution that will set a new direction for our civilization for another 30, 40, 50, 60 years.
Right.
If it doesn't, then it could be a short-lived blip and we might see a return back to the very, very awful normal that we've seen over the last couple of decades.
Absolutely. And I think with these revolutions and also these awakenings is what I like to call them, it's like this massive pendulum. Sometimes it swings slowly. Sometimes you have that one pinnacle event, like the assassination of Charlie Kirk, where that pendulum just goes flying. Yeah. And then it just goes too far, and then it just starts to slowly swing back down.
Well, that's the culture creating the counterculture. That's what that pendulum swing is. And for Australia, it was actually the COVID lockdowns that shocked a lot of Australians. And it didn't create a rapid change. What it did was it made people realise that their current view of government was wrong. It didn't make them realise what their view of government should be. It just made them realise my current view of government, of trusting the experts, of thinking by default that they know what they're doing, that's wrong. And we're watching them go on a journey now. And Australians, this is happening right across Australia, and it's fantastic to see because I never thought I would see this. We're watching Australians getting interested in politics. And the tragedy is, I've been commentating on politics for 17 years, and I observed very early on, people don't care about politics until it hurts them. The silver lining of COVID is that it hurt a lot of people. Now, that's not a good thing. But now, suddenly, millions, literally millions, we can see it in the polls and the way that things are shifting in the demographics in the polls in Australia. Millions upon millions of Australians are actually actively paying attention to politics, to government, to policy, to what they're doing to us. That is a wonderfully positive thing.
And keeping an eye now.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to do as a voice, as a political commentator, is to help them move from I no longer believe what I used to believe about government into I now know what I believe about government, and it is that government most of the time is the problem, and we need to shrink it. We need to cut the budgets. We need to shrink. We need far fewer laws, far fewer regulations, far less red tape, green tape, all the rest of it. Let people live. That's the message that I'm trying to deliver to Australians as they begin to ask themselves, what do I really believe about government?
And it sounds very similar to what Americans are thinking right now. I mean, here at FreedomFest, in fact, I was at America Fest 2025 in December in Phoenix, and just listening to some of the ideas, I'm like, interesting. I agree with a lot of this because I feel like the government, both sides of the aisle, they're reaching a little too far into our own cookie jars.
Remove the word little. They're reaching way too far.
Yeah, it's like, I didn't allow you to, you just walk through the front door. Now you've never even knocked, rang the doorbell, nothing.
So the founding fathers of America started a revolution over a couple of percentage points worth of tax on tea, amongst other things, of course. That's the thing that everyone focuses on, but there was more. But for 11 years, they petitioned and they sought to bring a non-violent resolution with the King of England, King George III, that would have involved America remaining part of the British Commonwealth, remaining under the British Crown. And it was only after 11 years of petitions rebellions and civil disobedience and a few little moments here and there that they eventually went, you know what, that's it. We've done everything we can peacefully. We're going to the other option. And that's when the Declaration of Independence happened. And of course, the War of Independence happened and a lot of people died. You don't want to get to that point lightly. And so it's really important, in my view, those 11 years are a critical part of America's history because it shows how determined they were to remain in honor, to remain in good faith, do everything they could without bloodshed. And bloodshed was genuinely the last resort. This is why I am as passionate as I am about civil disobedience, because that's one of those mechanisms that sits in that non-violent period.
Yes.
And if we do it right, and obviously King George III was never going to change his mind. It was just never going to happen. But we're not up against necessarily King George III. We're up against the local sheriff or the local city council or the federal government or a three-letter agency. We're up against other situations. And civil disobedience is a critical mechanism for bringing about non-violent change. Now, I believe it was JFK, I think it was, I should research this so I know it off the top of my head, who said, if you make peaceful change impossible, you make violent change inevitable. Right? There's a quote along that line. Yep. I'm sure your viewers will be like, no, it was this person, they said that, so my apologies, everybody. I need to look that up so I do know it off the top of my head. But that's essentially what I'm about. I'm saying, listen, guys, if all you do is petition and then you jump to revolution, and I hear Americans talking about, when the next civil war starts, etc., I'm sorry, you are in dishonor. You have not actually done all you could to avoid the bloodshed.
Right.
You need to go through the stages of saying no and engaging in civil disobedience, hopefully as a mass, hopefully not as an individual. An individual who does this is easily picked off.
Right.
As a mass, you have a much better chance. So build community, rebuild a freedom community that is willing to put your money where your mouth is, willing to take action. If you're not the kind of person who's willing to take the risk of disobeying yourself, get alongside those who are, so that they have the financial resources. That when I got arrested, there were people cooking for my family. There were people who started a fundraiser for legal costs. There were people who just stepped in and made it easy for my wife and my kids and my family to be able to just focus on me and supporting me as I went through what I went through. And that's a really important part of this. So if you might not be the person to be out the front taking the risk yourself, that's okay. Find the people that are and be in their corner. Be the people that enable them to stand their ground and engage in civil disobedience and cop the consequences that follow that. And if you're not willing to do that, then I question whether you really do believe in limited government. If you don't believe in limiting your obedience, then you don't believe that there's a limit to the government's power.
Right, and you see a lot of people, I'm sure, on social media or even in your country, like, for example, in the United States of America, you see it going from one complaint to straight up violence. Like, why? Like, there's an actual process. Like, you develop a community, there's petitioning, there's protests, there's a process to it all.
So that also usually happens when people isolate themselves. Yeah. So when someone goes out on their own, goes out on a limb, and becomes a lone ranger, and they can develop a bit of a savior complex about their own actions. And those are the people and we've seen this tragically. We've seen a couple of instances in Australia where police officers have been shot dead in situations where they just should not have been, right? Now, I actually think the police were in the wrong. They shouldn't have been on the property they were on. They shouldn't have been trying to action the warrants that they should have been trying to action. But also, the person who shot back should not have shot back. Like, and what's happened in every single case is, of course, and this is entirely predictable, total loss of any sympathy or respect for the cause of the person who pulled the trigger.
Yep.
So they've set their own cause back, and then they've justified the government going and targeting anyone else associated with them. They might operate under some sort of a label, and then anyone else who's also used that label in reference to themselves is now a legitimate government target according to our anti-terror squads and so forth. Right. And so all they've actually done is become a legitimizing agent for the overreach of the government. This is why I bang on and bang on and bang on about building community and making sure that actually when you decide you're going to engage in civil disobedience, it's not that you should never act alone. There are moments where that does become necessary, but be very careful, be very slow, and it has to be a matter of deep conscience for you. Because let me tell you something, it will cost you far more than you think. You can wargame it in your head and think about how this plays out. I'm going to tell you, multiply whatever you think you're going to go through, multiply it by 10 and then double it again. All right? And I know this from personal experience. So I was a clean skin. I was a good boy. I had a clean criminal record, all the rest of it, right up until COVID. And I made the decision. I was invited to come and speak. I was the only public figure speaking out against the lockdowns and saying, hey guys, let's do targeted protection for those who are actually vulnerable, but let's not blow up everybody else's lives in the process, right? Mm-hmm. That was my position. And I was invited to speak at the very first organized anti-lockdown protest, and I knew my life would never be the same. I knew if I crossed that threshold, I was painting a target on my back. I was becoming an enemy of the state. But I also knew that if I didn't do that, then I was a coward, because I talked about the need for us to stand up. I was talking the talk. This was my invitation to walk the walk. And I very nearly backed out of it. So I said I would do it, but we couldn't advertise it in advance because then it'd get shut down. I'd get arrested before the event even happened, right? And so a couple of hours before, on the morning, I posted up and said, hey, we're getting together here. We're doing a protest. I'm speaking, come and join us. And I drove out there. I didn't organize it. It was an hour from my house. And I drove out there, and the whole way I was wrestling with myself. And I wanted to turn around and drive. I'm like, if I just grab my phone now, delete that post, drive home and pretend it never happened, like, who's taken a screenshot? Is there any evidence out there really that I even did this? And I wrestled with myself far more than I like to admit. I got there, the police were already in the park. They were waiting for us. So they'd obviously seen the post, and they were there. Now, we didn't know at this point how they were going to react. Later on, they were shooting us with rubber bullets and driving armoured cars at us. But this was early. This was the very first one. We had no idea. And I sat in the car and I looked across the way at where they were, and I wrestled with myself. And what I did, because none of us know. We all want to believe. You're a dude, right? You've had this experience. Let's be humble enough to admit every dude has this experience at some point in their life, probably quite often, where we look at a scenario and we're like, if someone tried to come in with a gun or kidnap that person, this is what I would do. Be honest, right?
Yes,
okay, every single dude has this thing.
100%.
There's this little thread running in the back of our head, all right? We all want to believe that we would be the hero.
Yes.
But very rarely does life give us the opportunity to discover whether we've actually got what it takes. And I knew sitting in that car that this was my make or break moment. Because if I backed out of this for the rest of my life, I will know that I'm not actually that guy. Right. And I desperately wanted to believe that I was that guy.
Oh,
and so,
gosh, wow.
So what I did was I grabbed my phone and I started live streaming onto Facebook. And I had about 40,000 followers on Facebook at the time. And I waited until there was about 1,000 people watching because things were tense. People knew stuff was going on. So people would jump on as soon as I would start a live stream. And once I had about 1,000 people watching the live stream, I told them all what I was doing. I'm about to go and speak, blah, blah, blah. I basically cornered myself. Because now if I turn around and walk away, I look like the coward that I am.
Right.
I can't hide my cowardice if I'm a coward now.
Right.
And so I bullied myself. And I got out of the car and I walked across that street. And thankfully the police had no idea what to do. And they actually left. We held our rally for an hour and then we all left. And none of us got arrested on the day. They came for us afterwards. But that's a story for another time. But that was my crossing the Rubicon moment. That was my moment to discover I actually am the person that I always hoped I was. It was a close run thing. I'm not going to lie, but that's a decision that each and every one of us has to make. We actually have to decide. And for Americans, you've lived in such prosperity. And prosperity is a wonderful thing, and it's a natural byproduct of freedom, but it also becomes the enemy of freedom later on. Because the thing that will stop you from crossing that line is that it will cost you. It'll cost you the comfort, the prosperity, the self-image, the public acclaim. The reason why no other public figures were speaking out was because they didn't want to lose their following. The media were against them, the government were against them, their own audience was going to turn on them. Yep. I can tell you, a lot of mine did. And a lot of them came back later and apologized 2 years later and were like, yeah, I realize now I was wrong. They weren't willing to pay the price. Well, the more prosperous you are, the bigger the price. And so the very prosperity that has come out of your freedom is now the leverage that works against you being willing to take that step and go, you know what, I'm going to risk my fortune, my life, and my sacred honor. There's a reason why they said those things. They understood exactly what they were doing. And I'm sorry, America, every generation has to do that.
Absolutely.
There are no exemptions. No one is accepted. And my fear is that on the 250th birthday of America, if nothing changes, if things keep going the way they are, what we are seeing is that there will not be a 500th.
Interesting. That's a powerful statement to wrap up this episode on. But you know what? We might have to do a part 2 next year to see where we're at.
Yeah.
But I've got a question for you. How can people reach out to you and follow your mission and your story?
Sure. So topherfield.com is my website. There's a shop there. You'll find my books. You'll find my T-shirts and my caps that say too much 1984, not enough 1776. Good People Break Bad Laws is the name of my first book. Then I got a lot of blowback. A lot of people saying, how can you call yourself a Christian and be endorsing civil disobedience? So I had to write a second book, Good Christians Break Bad Laws, where I go through the theology of civil disobedience and I address Romans 13 and 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 13 and the tribute coin and Old and New Testament and Daniel and Moses and everybody and lay out why I as a Christian couldn't obey the government and why I believe actually churches and Christians ought to be among the very first people to stand up and say, no, government, you are trying to take the place of God.
Church and state.
Yeah, you're making yourself an idol. That's what we've actually done with our government in our culture today. We've made the government an idol. So that's my second book. You can watch my documentary for free at topherfield.com. Click on the documentary tab. It's right there. It's won 14 film awards, including the Best Libertarian Ideals Award here at Anthem. And then if you scroll down, there's another video. And this is actually, if you do one thing, if I can ask your listeners, your viewers to do one thing, go to topherfield.com, click on the documentary tab, and actually scroll down to the second video. It's an age-restricted video. You have to click to YouTube and be logged in on YouTube. That is a 45-minute video of a session that I did at the CPAC Australia conference a few years ago. And it is myself and 3 other survivors from the COVID madness. A police officer who resigned, the very first person to get shot with a rubber bullet, who needed 4 surgeries and lost 4 internal organs from the blunt force trauma of a rubber bullet. They're incredibly damaging things. And a young woman, a young businesswoman who they tried to push to suicide because she spoke out and her video went viral, was watched by tens of millions of people. Her face was put on the local newspaper, her address was leaked, her phone number was leaked. And during the lockdowns, people would actually disobey the lockdowns to come and smash her windows and bang on her doors at night, yelling the most vile things. And they tried to push her into suicide. And she was one of the people that reached out to me. I had a lot of people, again, because I was one of the only public figures speaking out, that reached out to me in crisis. And thank God most of them lived, but there are 4 that I know of that went through with taking their own lives during that time because of the psychological trauma of what they were going through. So if I can ask for one thing, go to topherfield.com, click on the documentary tab, scroll down to the second video and watch that. That would be my request for all your viewers. I am at Topher Field on all socials. Most of my work is Australia-centric, but I do international stories and these sorts of things. And I'm very, very grateful to anyone that chooses to follow my work. I am spending more time in the US as time goes on, and I hope eventually to be able to bring this message to the US, because like I said at the very beginning, where the US goes, the rest of the world follows. And I think that the lessons that I learned and the message that I bring out of Australia is very, very relevant to America today.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it from the man himself. Listen, if you want to learn more about Topher and what he's doing in Australia and also internationally, check the description below. Follow him on all his social medias and check us out on the website as well. Check out his website as well along with us. You'll be able to see more information about him on our website as well once the video is published. And to my audience out there, listen, build yourself better and bigger every day. Live better, live bigger. Always move ever forward. And ladies and gentlemen, remember to think, because if we don't think, I don't know if there's going to be a 500. And just like his shirt says, think free by Topher Field. Yeah. Topher, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
What a pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely.